Welcome back, everybody. I am back here with Coach Brett. Lumos is on.
Good to see you.
Born and raised. Born and raised.
At least raised.
raised and raised. And we are here to do another little talk. And today we are talking about coaches development, right? How we develop as coaches, the value of coaching, and specifically about some, learning stuff that you have done recently. So tell me about OPEX. Tell me about the OPEX CCP, the Coaches Certification Program. What it is, why'd you do it?
Yeah. So it's a pretty intensive, 4-month course that OPEX is a coaching development business. That is what they do. They do own affiliate gyms around around the country. There's an OPEX Round Rock, whatever. But the core of their business is developing coaches. And this Coaches Certificate Program is a program that they started, I don't know how long ago, but it's about 4 months of pretty intensive work to give coaches a system for what they call individual design. We'll get into more of how it translates to us later, but we would call that full spectrum coaching. But kind of regardless of how, what the business model looks like, what the course teaches is very much like a front to back system to help coaches create a framework to hype athletes into, and I say athletes with any different goal, from competition or performance orientation to general population health and longevity orientation, and being able to see what their goals are, what they need, and how to develop them properly, and really gives a system for how to do that. And so it's been super helpful. I started in January and I just finished a couple weeks ago.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did the certification in 2016.
Yeah.
The big confession is I never did my final project. Yeah. So I'm sorry if everybody's thought I'm smarter than I am. I'm not. I ended up opening a gym. As I was getting ready, all the dominoes started falling. But I did all the classroom part, all the modules. I did 2 trips to Scottsdale for it.
And you were South Brooklyn.
That was when I was at CrossFit South Brooklyn. Our coach John has done it as well. So it's been around at least for 10 years. I think longer than that. I think it had been around for a number of years before I took it.
I know they have a few different iterations of it, but I thought it was incredibly valuable. I've been to other weekend seminars and other kind of courses and developments, and I thought it gave me a lot more value than some of the other things.
Yeah, I mean, certainly more in depth, certainly more than a lot of things that I've taken, science based and rigorous, right? Kind of academic, and kind of a high. I would say sort of a high level of detail, high level of assumed understanding, and sort of high level of standard, right? Assuming really high standards of the coaching you're going to give, the knowledge that you are going to bring forward. So sweet. What do you think out of it all, that you've gotten, has most helped your ability to serve the people that you work with here at the gym?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is, I think the biggest thing is I did learn a lot of knowledge, which is very helpful, energy system training, resistance training, a lot of knowledge about specific principles within that. A lot of things I already knew coming in, a lot of things that I learned there, and a lot of things that kind of put pieces together to different things that I already knew. So, that was definitely helpful. But I would say the biggest thing that I got out of it wasn't necessarily the knowledge or the specific bits of information. But more so the system as a whole, right? How to make sure that me and my client, or me and the people in our group classes, are aligned on their goals, and creating a framework and a system of kind of checks and balances and progression to get them there along the way, right? To make sure that we're actually moving in the right direction, where you'd be surprised how easy it is to kind of you think you're going in one direction and you end up in a different direction when you don't have some of those guardrails and you don't have that kind of North Star or a system in place that keeps your eye on the prize. It's, you think you've got a system until somebody shows you a better one. And then you're like, oh man, like, yeah, that is very helpful. So I know that sounds like kind of vague and abstract, but kind of like behind the scenes, having a better framework and a better process and a better lens through which to like view people's progression and their marching towards their goals is incredibly helpful. And I feel, way better equipped to serve my clients even better than I was before.
Sweet. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound vague or, abstract to me.
Yeah.
I think that's been my experience broadly across a bunch of different things. I mean, when I opened the gym, I thought I was like, well, I'm a hot shit coach. I'll be a great business owner. And until I found good business systems, the business was kind of stumbling along. And I think similarly with the way that, I have looked at client work in the past to the present day, client work, member work, working with our people in group class, working with individual clients is like the programming, the exercises is one small piece of it that I used to think was the whole thing. How we arrange them and then how we again, right, check and balance sort of like, are we making sure things are happening? Are things accessible and understandable and stuff like that? Even to the point of like, is it easy to sign up for classes and view our programming and understand those kind of things? Like, if we don't get that right, it doesn't even give us the opportunity to do all the things that maybe we are, historically good at or something like that. So it's like we need the system to allow us to do the other stuff. So, I think it brings us into this concept of like thinking about the role of a coach and like when we do something like this, kind of like getting a better take at like what is most important for a coach to be. So kind of like thinking about it in different ways, like what would you say is the difference, and this is something we obviously talk about here a lot at the gym between like a pro coach, a professional coach who takes it seriously and more of like a hobbyist coach or what I've heard before called like a love language coach.
I've never heard that.
Oh yeah. It's like, coaching is their love language. They do it because like they love the getting up in front and yelling about a workout with somebody, but it's not necessarily like they're all encompassing like job to develop. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why the fitness industry seems to tolerate, maybe more so than I think customers in other industries like tolerate, a wider spectrum of what I'm going to call professionalism, and that's not to throw shade at anybody or whatever, but just like in terms of the base level of product that you're getting, and maybe it's a challenge of like differentiation, right? Like, if you don't know a ton about fitness coming in, it's like hard to differentiate, somebody who does this on the side for a few hours a week versus somebody who has like committed to, one of the things that we'll get into later, but committed to like a level of self-mastery here, right? And holding certain levels of standard to the care that they're providing people with. So I do think that there's a difference here. And one of the things that I loved about, when I joined the Lumos team, whenever, 2 years ago, you were like, yeah, my goal is to hire full-time coaches. And I think that's a big thing, right? Like if you do this full time, you have to be a professional. You know what I mean? Obviously there's going to be
I hope
standards.
so.
Yeah, but I mean like your livelihood fully depends on it, right? When your livelihood doesn't really depend on it, it's a lot easier to, not go that extra mile, to not hold that standard in the same way, not to say, somebody is better or worse, but it's just like, do you want your doctor to be somebody that like, yeah, I kind of like on the side, I'm pretty interested in like science and medicine. It's like, no, like you want somebody who does this all day, every day.
Right.
Or at least I would, you know what I mean? That brings like a standard of excellence to it. And I think that's part of the difference between that kind of like professional, like this is what I do all the time, full time.
Yeah. I mean, I think as far as like, professional versus, hobbyist, full-time versus part-time, I think there is room sometimes, to have part-time coaches, but
Yeah,
I
sure.
think always with me, the goal is that like they're a part-time with an eye on full-time, that they are trying to like, that's like an arc of their career of like, I'm trying to develop more. And as I develop more, I'm going to add more and more with the goal of eventually becoming like, this is what I do. This is my profession. I mean, I was lucky to kind of like start part-time and like that made it doable. But pretty quickly, I was like, how do I add more and more and more? And the more I added, the better I got. I mean, and that was so apparent to me. It was like
Mm.
every 2 hours I added to my schedule, I got 200% better, and was like, and it was so obvious. And I looked back and was like, wow, I was coaching at like half capacity because, I just didn't have enough time to put into it, and that added level of mastery and things like that. So
Yeah.
I certainly think it's the case. I'm sure there's, why that is in the fitness industry. I don't know. I mean, like it's a hard industry for business owners, certainly for coaches to work in. It
Hmm.
can be a real like eat 'em up, and like there's, I think like because of that, I think people are often content with people who are right less professional than they could be or less of an expert than they could be. Um, what about somebody who the idea of kind of like a problem solver versus like a template prescriber or sort of just like a kind of like executor?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's like a big one, right?
yeah,
Like, if you're engaging a coach, whether that's, one-on-one training, whether it's, what we call full spectrum coaching, whether, it's how you decide on which gym you want to join because you're joining group classes. I don't think like that matters, right? But like what matters is that there's something that you want to change. If you're changing something, there's clearly something that you want to change. And being able to communicate with somebody, with a professional who understands like this is the problem, and like we can put a finger on, okay, this is the thing that needs solving. And most people are going to require something at least a little bit different, right? I'm just not at the place where it's like the one size fits all works for everybody. I think like a lot of that stuff like works for the median person with the median problem, and there's a lot of things that like fall right into that, and that's fine. But most people, I don't think it lines up that perfectly, and so they need somebody to say like, okay, here's like the problem that you're experiencing, and we need the right tool for that job. You can't just use a Phillips head screwdriver for
no
every
matter
right.
how hard I
No,
try.
yeah, no matter how hard you try, you can't get a nail in with a Phillips head
Right.
screwdriver, right? And so,
I think eventually, if you pull each person's timeline long enough,
mhm,
everybody will require an individual solution at some point.
I think that's
Like
that's the big thing.
yeah, right. Like maybe especially if you're new to fitness, if you've never done anything, right? You got a year, you got 2 years, right? And I mean, I think like about that in a lot of what we do here at the gym, even before we get into individual design,
Mhm.
before we get into full spectrum coaching, but just generally is like, eventually people are going to get into the point. And sometimes sometimes the reasons are like good positive reasons like, oh, I've been doing this but now I want to run a race, I want to do whatever, I want something kind of specific that way. Sometimes it's a more like negative reason of like something that's not feeling good or I'm running into a roadblock. But whatever it is, I do think that's when right now we've kind of outstripped the ability of like a part-time coach who comes in and just sort of like runs a script,
Exactly.
right? Versus somebody who's like, this is my again, my full like responsibility to like sit down and think about this problem and think about how we're going to solve it. I even think about it, as relates to like, programming for a gym of like, gyms that use other people's programming. And it's like,
Mm.
same kind of idea of like, sure, like maybe a really great template and you can like get up and execute it. But like, how much are you actually like problem solving for your population?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, I think there's a lot of folks out there that will, obviously high rocks and endurance training is close to me. And so like the example that I think of often is, you'll have a runner, somebody who comes in with a running background. It's like, hey, I want to train for high rocks. And then, 10 minutes later, you have a strength athlete who's like, yeah, hey, I want to get into high rocks. And so they're coming at it from totally different angles with totally different backgrounds. They should not be doing the same program is not going to be as effective for each of them, right? And so the person who's just giving that template and saying, hey, this is how you train for a high rocks is not, in my opinion, not serving the best interest of those two particular clients,
Yeah. And I think a lot of like lower grade coaches or, certainly kind of like internet coaches who've made their name on like their own athleticism often tend to think through this lens of like, here's what I would do.
What worked for me,
If
yeah.
I was training for a high rocks, well, here's how I would do it. And it's like, well, that's great, dude, But I think especially if you have a gym where you're getting a broad population of people pretty quickly you see the lie in that, and you see that like, oh, this isn't going to work, for everyone. I need to think not about what I would do, but what would they do, right?
100%. I
Yeah.
mean, I've definitely moved that arc, and probably because I wasn't a very good athlete. Right? I'm still an athlete,
Well,
but
right.
like what worked for me, wasn't necessarily working for me anymore. Either,
Right.
right? But yeah, I did.
Well, I mean, that's the like classic, they say that about like, a baseball player. If you
Mhm.
ask a really good baseball player, like what they do when they're at the plate, they're like, well, I just hit the ball,
Right. Yeah.
like it comes at me and then I just fucking clobber it. Whereas like the less good player can tell you every little thing about their swing from like their setup to their grip to their stance to all these different things. So, lastly, and then, kind of we're already into this sort of like the internet world, right? You know, what's the difference between like a coach as like, as a shepherd versus like a coach who's more of a sort of a guru model?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is like your hobby horse, even more than mine.
For sure.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think it's maybe we got the order of these backwards, but the situation or the example that we just described is like the perfect example of that difference, right?
Sure.
Where a guru has the answer, right? And there's only one, and you can only get it from there.
Right.
You
For
can only
the
get it from the
low
source.
price. Yeah.
Yes, of $3.99
Right.
or $1 million. I don't know,
Right.
whatever people are charging out there in guru land. But thinking that you have the answer before you even know what the problem is obviously doesn't make sense, and nobody would accept that in any other circumstance. Why they accept it in fitness, I don't really understand. You might have a better
Oh,
understanding.
way wellness more.
Yeah.
Largely, I do think people like do understand, like have some sort of capacity for guruism, has some sort of capacity for like the magic. I mean, I think bringing it back to OPEX, like that is one of the things that I remember I really appreciated at the time was like, they are very much this kind of like, listen, none of the like movements we're talking about here and other things like none of these things are proprietary or secret or whatever. These are all things people have been doing for a long time that have long track history. The thing that is proprietary is again how do we organize them, right? How do we systematically apply them to people in appropriate ways?
And that's the shepherd, right?
Yeah.
That's like the guiding through the trails, the
Right.
bobbing and weaving in real time.
Right.
Like, does real time mean this second? No, but it means like week to week, month to month, cycle to cycle, year to year, however long you're working with somebody. But being able to adjust, adapt, and that there's not one answer to one problem because nothing is univariable, right? Like
Sure.
everything is like multivariate and there's a lot of things going on and people's lives change, people's goals change, people's relationship with fitness changes, and like all of those things need to be considered, and that's the shepherding.
Cool. I mean, I think that brings us into like, now we've defined kind of like what is a coach, sort of like what is, what isn't, or sort of like what's like a mid-value, high value.
Yeah.
Talking about value of a coach, like what is it that you think a coach uniquely does for people, that doing stuff on their own isn't going to do, that maybe like following a program they found on the internet isn't going to do? Like what can a coach, like a real person coach do for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think, people come to coaches sometimes as I find this experience has resonated a lot with me where I feel like in engaging clients and clients engaging me as a coach, where it's like there's kind of this like question, it's like, what do you want from this? You know what I mean? And I think there's this thought that a coach is, they have this information that I don't have, right? And if I only had that information, then I would be able to do the same thing, right? That there's an information gap or a knowledge gap. And of course there is, right? Like, I do this all the time. If you did something 40 hours a week, you'd know a lot more about it than somebody who didn't, right? So there is an information gap, but in the current, you got AI and ChatGPT and,
just the internet in general. Like we live in the
right?
most
information
rich age, or like access to information rich age that has ever existed.
Yeah. And so it's not that it's not that you can't get the information, right? So I don't think that like the information and the knowledge is the number one value.
If anything, it's too much information, right? It's like, oh, do this, do that, do whatever. Here's the, like, and people are
there's some value there, right? There's some value in like a trusted advisor who can like parse through that information for you, right? And say like, this is worth, something, and this, this information, this is not worth stuff. And so I do think that there's a value there, but I think the bigger value is more in kind of creating that system that we talked about. And I would almost call it like an incentive structure, and it's like incentive structure, I feel like almost has like a bit of a negative connotation, but like, I guess what I mean is like a system where the person gets the kind of satisfaction of progressing, of moving forward, and not just that they are moving forward, but that they can see that they're moving forward. Right. And I think that's like equally as important, right? So, sometimes the role of a coach, I definitely don't think it's like hard in the book, in the job description, that a coach is there to provide accountability. I think that sometimes direct accountability from a coach can be a useful tool. The system itself should provide some accountability to the person, right? Like, I don't feel as good when I don't sleep well, and then I want to go wake up to go to the gym, right? Like, there's this whole kind of cycle, this well-rounded structure that kind of provides some of those guardrails for a person to stay accountable, whether that's accountability is based around consistency or intent of the workout, or like doing things correctly and not going too hard, not going too light, right? And like, there's accountability happens in a bunch of different ways. I feel like we only think about it in this narrow aim of like consistency. How many times a week can I get to the gym? Right. And that might be most important for somebody, but intensity modulation.
Some people that's a given. Some people are like, I'm coming to the gym 6 days a week, no matter what. And the accountability is like, yeah, but are you doing
what you're supposed to,
right? Are you hitting your intention? Are you kind of freelancing? Are you not putting yourself in a position to succeed, right? Yeah. Are you coming to the gym and every night you slept 4 hours, and it's like, well, what are we getting out of these 6 sessions, we're doing? Like, yeah, I think, again, that broader view of like what your role of a coach is to be like, I'm considering all of that. I'm across all of those things.
Exactly. Yeah. Right? We're across all of those things. We have access, insight into all of those things. And we're managing, the overall stress, so to speak, right? Like, I think people often think like, oh, the only thing that's relevant to my fitness is how much I train. And, I think that that's, certainly not the case, right? How much you sleep is very much a part of it. How you're eating, the other stresses in your life, you know what I mean? If you come here 5 times a week, but you're playing soccer 4 nights a week too, right? That should be taken into account. Right. It doesn't mean that, you shouldn't work out because you're playing soccer 4 times a week, but it should be taken into account.
And how much I train from a quantity perspective versus a quality perspective, Absolutely. Right? Like, how well do I train, mm-hmm. right? Like, do I hit my paces? Do I hit my, correct intention on workouts? Do I hit the correct RPE for weights? Or is it just sort of like all over the place because it's impossible to predict from one day to another, like who's showing up, right? And I do think we think about that. But also, I think you talked about other, roles of a coach as sort of like, they're not just a logging system, right? They're not just somebody who the results come in and they're going okay, I'm writing this down. Obviously, again, on the technology side now, there's plenty of ways to do that, but they're a witness, they're a teacher.
Yeah, I think the witness thing is important.
Yeah.
That there's somebody, and I use witness not from an accountability standpoint, but just there's someone with you. You know what I mean? That is seeing the effort that you're putting in and is intimately involved with the effort versus the results, right? And there's somebody there to work through that process with you. And so, yeah, I think the feedback one is a great example, for if you're not familiar, a lot of full spectrum coaches or individual design, what have you, right? There's there's an app that gives you what workout you're supposed to do for the day, and you put your feet, I did this, I did that, I did this. And if you're logging in and you're okay, back squat, I did 150 pounds. That's.
You banged me on this yesterday, yeah. Right? I have just started. I'm putting my money where my mouth is, right? Brett's been programming for me, and I did some stuff and just just check the box. And he's like, bro, how does this feel?
Yeah.
Did that feel good? Did it feel restricted or whatever? And I had to almost jog myself into being because I haven't worked with a coach in a while of oh, right. He can't see inside my brain.
Well, and that's my job. Right?
Yeah,
it's
right.
It's my job not just to know, but to get you to know mm-hmm. as well, right? To ask you to think about, what's the limiter here? What's the restriction there? Does this feel good? Can you progress? What level of effort are we at? And so I think that kind of acting as a witness helps the client bring a next level of awareness and a next level of intention to what they're doing.
Right.
And, like at the end of the day, I think, buy-in is really like the ultimate tool that like a coach creates. I mean, we'll talk about programming in a second, I guess, and the role that it fits there. But, being able to create buy-in, I think, is infinitely more important than like the perfect program. You know what I mean? Like somebody who believes that what they're doing is helping.
Right.
Somebody that believes in it enough to show up and do it. Right. Somebody believes that it's worth sacrificing some of the other thing. And I say sacrificing, right? It depends on the person, right? But like getting a good night's sleep, like doing all of the other things around it to facilitate that, I think is, really important.
Yeah. I think 100%, and I think like, there's lots of different ways to generate that buy-in, but like, if you are not creating that for your client, it's gonna, I think that's part of the service you offer, right? Is like you create that buy-in, or else they have to sort of self-create it, which can be really hard.
Yeah, I mean that's the guiding part, right? Like that's the shepherding. We use that kind of car. I love the kind of car road trip analogy, where client comes in with a problem. To me, that problem is like a destination that they want to get to. Now, of course, in real life, you never get to the destination, right? It's always, we're constantly.
Well, you get there, and then there's the next one.
There's a next destination.
Right,
right, exactly. Right, but there's a destination that you want to get to, and in the analogy, I like to think of the client as the driver, right? They're driving the car, right? The coach is like the navigator or the co-pilot, right? You're there to show the way. Right. And then the car is like the programming that binds us together, right? The vehicle is like the prescription,
right.
And that's kind of like what binds us together in that process. And so, I think like it's obviously important to have good program. It's important to have a working car, but you could just drive a car around in circles and you'll never get to where you're going. You know what I mean? And I think that's like a really good analogy for like what we're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, more important that you have a really good navigator or somebody who really knows where you're going.
Yeah.
Versus like a hot sports car versus a kind of like reliable economy car. Both of those will get you there.
Yeah.
If you know where you're going. If you don't know where you're going, the car is sort of irrelevant.
Exactly.
Right? Like it's sort of you're just gonna you're gonna drive around in circles or show up somewhere you don't want to be.
Yeah, right. I like when you say it's like if you walk, you'll get wherever you want to be. It doesn't matter
as long as you have a good as long as you know exactly where you're going. Yeah. Right, you could theoretically walk there over a long period of time, but you cannot drive the world's fastest car to an unknown destination, right? You it's just never going to happen.
Which is not to devalue the importance of programming, but just to say that that's not the highest value of what a coach is. There's a lot of good programs out there, but just knowing what is right for you at the right time to get you to the right place. Right. That's the role of a coach.
Yeah, and specific to the person again. Yeah. So let's talk about a little bit, we're into that kind of like programming, coaching. What's like, where are they the same? Where are they different? Like, what's the kind of like, I think starting off like kind of a misconception or like the common path for people often is this kind of like, well, I have a program, right? Like, or if I have a coach, if I'm hiring, I'm working with a coach. Yeah, they're going to give me a program. That's what they do.
Yeah, that's what they do.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's, we've even internally kind of changed some of our language around, right? If you want to talk about IPD versus.
Yeah. We've done programming for people for years, but really it was always coaching.
It was always
coaching. And I think really a lot of this alignment has been like trying to get to be more, specific and upfront and clear about like that's the service. It's the coaching and programming is a part of that. And I think language is important. The words you use are important. So we were calling it, individual program design. And I think often for, that centered programming too much versus coaching, right? So we're moving it to what we call full spectrum coaching. Very first, like the language of that being different is like, this is about the coaching relationship. Programming is part of that.
Yeah,
right? Programming is
it's obviously part of it.
Yeah,
right? Like
a big part.
It's not an insignificant part, but like it is not the whole thing. You know what I mean? And I think that's you can go online and get a program, and some of them are good, right?
Yeah.
It just, is it the right one for you? Who's to say, but there's a lot of good programs that are, significantly less price wise than what coaching costs, right? Because it's a different thing, right? It's not just programming, it's something different than that, right?
And
It's
I
all the
think,
things that we just talked about.
I think, right, you can get a program. I think now we get a lot of people doing like, oh, I have ChatGPT program for me, which like I think is very interesting. And I've played around with it and I'm like, wow, like, there's some stuff there.
We don't have time to go down this route.
We don't. I mean, the big thing about that is like garbage in, garbage out, right? And ChatGPT will never ask you the next question. I mean, I think the big thing is like, when we're talking about a coach as somebody to like teach you and challenge you and, sort of like almost be like, as this in this navigator example, not only telling you where to go, but also helping you think of like, what's our next destination after we get there?
Yeah.
Right. AI will never do that for you. Certainly just a off the rack program will never do that for you. That is a map to a very possibly a specific place or something. And no further. It never goes any further than that. Then it's on you again to like find the next treasure map, if that's the analogy. But switching to that kind of full spectrum model is also sort of like in this kind of idea of like, again, coaching having more stuff in it, right? Accountability, that buy-in we were talking about, believing that planning and vision and flexibility. Right.
Flexibility is a big one too. I think communication is a big one. One of the things that we didn't talk to, about, and when we're like, what makes a good coach is, I think there's a teaching element that's also really important there, right? If you're engaging a coach, in whatever capacity, you should be learning something, right? And because there's something that there's a piece on the board that you're not seeing, otherwise you wouldn't have the problem in the first place, right? So there is something, and that learning is not necessarily information, right? But that learning is how to think about things, or like that learning is like how to bring awareness to different aspects. So I think that like that's, really important, and that's something that, talking to my clients directly, if you feel like you're not learning anything from this process, like I think that's a problem, and I think like that's a failure on my part. And so come talk to me if you if you feel like you're not learning something, right? Like I'm doing something wrong, and so we need to address that, and we need to address why that's the case.
My job is not just to I'm not just what are those little clicky things that bouncers use? The bouncers use, I'm not just a ticker. I'm not just a rep counter, right? I'm not just standing there being like 1, 2, 3, good. I'm not even just like a rep counter plus I don't know, movement quality judge, right? Good squat, bad squat, whatever it is, right? I'm that, right? I can be a rep counter. I'm a movement quality judge, but right, I'm also trying to be an educator, a sort of like, connector. Right. I'm trying to use the fact that I am thinking about this full time to sort of like help person, whether that's like in person, hey, let me show you this, or let me tell you why we're doing this. I mean, I do this a lot. I'm pretty sure you do this, like send clients articles, be like, hey, I think you should read this. Hey, have you heard about this? Let me send that to you. Let me show you this thing. Because I mean, that's part of, like I want to shore up, if I can tell one of my clients like there's a gap, there's something that I'm like, man, if they understood this, all this would be so much easier. All this would be there. And eventually, like, I do think there's some element of like, and eventually I'd like them to be able to like, own parts of this, right? To understand what this looks like for themselves.
I was just listening to or reading an article yesterday on like autonomy, being like a goal.
Right.
And I do think that's like a really interesting one. And so, like there should be an increase in autonomy through, a client's life cycle with a particular coach. I think that's important.
And that's not threatening to, I mean, I think if a coach finds that threatening, they just need to get better. Like, the example I always use for people on that is like, Serena Williams has a coach. She's really good at tennis. She probably knows a lot about it, right? She still needs somebody who, is watching her, who can provide an outside kind of eye and voice and, concept of kind of where she is. Like that's always going to be valuable, right? I don't ever think there's a time where it's like, well, I've taught you everything you need to know. Fly. I mean, you could, but there will always be value in the coach, even just as like, again, an outside interpreter, right? Somebody who has an objective view of what you're doing It's why coaches have coaches.
100%.
Like,
Yeah, we both have.
yeah, absolutely.
And then, but you did mention flexibility, and I think that's an important one, right? And like one of the things that we wanted to do, as we kind of made the switch from programming focus to the full spectrum coaching focus, is take into account that people's lifestyle changes over time, their seasons of life change a little bit, that they might be traveling or going on vacation and coming back, right? And like we should be able to take all those things into account like seamlessly. You know what I mean? Like part of the coaching is managing the whole process. There's almost like a project management aspect to it. And so understanding when somebody's in maybe a busy work season that we need to pull back the total overall load. Maybe that goes from 5 training sessions a week to 3 training sessions a week for a period of time. Maybe that means that we're doing more things outside the gym for whatever reason. If somebody's rehabbing something, maybe it's more like walks at a brisk pace or, things that are kind of outside the gym that, you wouldn't think of are naturally as programmed. But having the flexibility to kind of move back and forth between things as people's life demands it and as their goals demand it, I think is really important. And that's something I think we have a better structure now for.
Well, I think we were making, it was an oversight in the sense of like, even asking the person, if what we think about, I think about this broadly over a lot of things we do. I talk to people in our group classes about this, is like, our job is to take things off your plate, right? Our job is to make, this part kind of like, not as mindless, but like as easy and as sort of seamless as possible to do. And I think we were making a mistake there, because like, even to have them say like, oh shit, man, like work is really ramping up. I think I need to talk to Brett and ask him to knock my programming down. To ask them to do that is putting a burden on them, right? To ask them to do that is like putting them in charge of both their fitness from like a conceptual place, the administrative side of like, oh, I have to send an email and request my membership to be changed and blah, blah, blah. And all of those different things are, again, getting in the way of like their potential development versus, if we're doing our job well as coaches, we should be able to see like, man, this person's kind of like, their numbers are flagging, they're this, that, the other. We have this conversation. They're like, yeah, work is kicking my ass right now. And it's our call to say like, okay, we need to change things. And now, before we put it on the person to be like, well, how many days a week do you want to train? People have no idea how many days, certainly they don't have any idea how many days they should be training, probably, and we have people who grossly under and overestimate that. And so, we've kind of brought this all under the umbrella of like, this is our job to figure out, what we're asking you to sign up for is basically a coach who you trust in. And then we're going to have that conversation, but we are going to help guide you those days. And we can, that can go up, that can go down, that can go, whatever way is going to, again, get you there better.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think you made a really good point there that we don't, the expectation is not for this to be like some mindless exercise, like outsource all the cognitive load to somebody else,
right.
But that, my goal is that that person can redirect that same cognitive load to things that I think are more beneficial to them.
Right? I like that, right?
Like, okay, instead of having to plan out your training week and it's like, oh, where does this fit with work and all this stuff,
right.
A big one that I've been doing recently that, and just like a very small thing, but is trying to, am I wedded that somebody has to do this workout on a Monday and this workout on a Tuesday and this one on a Wednesday? For most people, not really, but I think people appreciate that. Like, I'm pretty like on it about asking them like, what days do different things work best for you, and trying to minimize the cognitive load that you're going to spend administratively. And I would rather you spend that same time or that same mental energy looking at your programming and being like, okay, I know the paces that I'm going to hit for that, as opposed to running up to the gym, pulling the rower down and says, okay, 2 minutes of rowing, let me just row at a pace. It's like, no, like be intentional about that. And so redirecting some of that administrative cognitive load to intentional fitness or performance cognitive.
And the load is finite. So if I spend all of it on like calendar scheduling,
right,
I don't have enough of it left for, really digesting what my, the intention of my program that day, coming to it sort of like fresh and excited and all those things. So like the job is to deliver people to that point where they are at their like best, potential to succeed.
Yeah.
Sweet. I think we've talked about most things. So, if you are somebody who maybe has done individual programming here in the past and is like interested in how this has changed, you can shoot either of us now we have lots of ways, emails, texts, Slack, Heartbeat, our new system, all sorts of ways. You could talk to us in person in the gym if you're if you're so brave. If you've never done this before, but this sounds like interesting to you, shoot the gym a message, shoot either of us individually a message, and we'll get you started. There's like some intake stuff and like a lot of us kind of like learning before we get you going. But, it's something that we hope to, across all the coaches, across all the programs, like develop more. And early results have been really good. We've got a couple people in it, and like how's that been going so far?
I mean, it's been going awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, from like a versus the old way versus the new way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super helpful. It takes like a burden off me where if I think that the best thing, some days, like the best thing for certain people is to go on a 45-minute walk in sunlight.
Right.
You know what I mean? And before that felt like, is that the right, is that the right?
Am I like bringing value on the 3 days they've paid for?
Yeah, right. And now it's like, okay, like I think they can have a little bit more trust and I can have a little bit more trust in that relationship that like I'm only doing what's best for them at all times.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think it's been really helpful. So yeah, I think it's been a good thing. I think, if you're seeing this and coaching hasn't been something that you've thought about before, or so, if any of the kind of points that we've hit on today you can relate to or like resonate with you, I would say like, just reach out to us. And it's more about, I think so much of, what we're trying to do in this podcast and, in general is educating people about what the value is and what the use case is, so, yeah, reach out and ask us questions. Cause I do think like learning more about like what it is and what it will look like for you, and what that looks like kind of on a day-to-day basis in a little bit more detail might be, really helpful for some people and might kind of, sometimes those small changes can make all the difference. So,
yeah, I was going to mention this before and then we kind of got into other things. I think it's often funny, the person who you're talking to, right? This person who's like, oh, maybe I've never done that. Or, I think some of the people are like, and, I don't have any idea of what I want to do. Maybe I need a coach.
Yeah.
I think also if you're one of the people who, sometimes I hear this when I do intros with people or things like that. Well, I know what I need to do, right? And it's like, again, this is the kind of knowledge gap thing. It's like, yeah, well, maybe the knowledge gap is not the problem, right? But if you're somebody who like, you feel like you've got a lot of the tools, a lot of stuff, but whether for a long time or maybe even sometimes just recently, right? Like when I reached out to you to do full spectrum coaching for me, I was like, I'm having trouble with balance specifically right now. And I need some help with that. I need an outside eye on how I'm balancing the different things I want to do, right? I would consider myself, fairly knowledgeable in the what of what I'm doing, right? If you're somebody who knows a lot about something, but for some reason your schedule's changed, you got a new job, you had a kid, you whatever, and all of a sudden you're like, man, this is not as easy as it used to be. What's going wrong? It might just be like it would be useful for, again, an outside objective observer to kind of make some of the judgment calls for you so that you can focus on the doing part.
100%.
Yeah.
In that example, you might know how to maintain your fitness when you have unlimited time, 5 days a week to train.
Right.
But all of a sudden something happened, maybe you have a kid or, whatever. And now you only have 3 days a week to train. But now it's like, oh man, I can't condense all that stuff into three, you need a different approach.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so what worked isn't always the thing that works going forward.
It's fun working with those people because, again, like one part is already kind of solved, right? So it's like, often those people we can like get moving really quickly. So sweet.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll do another one.
See you guys.
All right. Peace.